All right, so this was rather horrific. Alabama carries out first known execution with nitrogen gas in the U.S. Now the state's AG expects more states to follow. They're trailblazers over there in Alabama. Alabama inmate Kenneth Smith was put to death Thursday night by nitrogen hypoxia, marking the nation's first known execution using that method. Now Alabama's Attorney General wants to help other states interested in using the new form of capital punishment. I mean, this is better than the original proposition. They wanted to bring back crucifixion, but they felt
Right,
some of
yeah.
the religious people wouldn't like it. Smith, 58, was sentenced to death for his role in a 1988 murder for hire and had previously survived a failed attempt to execute him by lethal injection in 2022. Just to fill that out, because the section of the article I have doesn't. They couldn't find the vein. So this guy was all strapped to the gurney and had them poking around in his arms to execute him, and they couldn't find it, and they called it off. So this is the second time they brought him in to execute him. His attorneys fought the execution until the end, ultimately losing a final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday evening. Smith's legal team, alongside experts and advocates from the U.S. to the United Nations, had voiced concern that nitrogen hypoxia could lead to excessive pain or even torture. Now you think? Alabama is one of only 3 states, Oklahoma and Mississippi being the others, to have approved the method, which is designed to replace oxygen in the body with a high concentration of nitrogen causing death. So far, Alabama is the only state to have carried it out or even outlined a protocol on how to do it. The Attorney General had a message for colleagues across the country who were monitoring developments in the nation's first execution using nitrogen hypoxia. Alabama's done it. Now so can you, Steve Marshall said, and we stand ready to assist you in implementing this method in your states. Coming soon to a state near you, kids.
Yeah, really anxious to spread the word on this.
Is really
a
yes,
pressing need for this, for
yes.
torturing inmates to death.
Yep, he's proselytizing his neighboring states. So here's a little helpful graphic from the U.S. Sun, so you can see the process here. 1, death row inmate strapped to gurney. 2, and don't try this at home. 2, respirator face mask placed over nose and mouth. 3, breathable air replaced with nitrogen. 4, inmate loses consciousness. 5, death from lack of oxygen within 22 minutes. It's a little unclear how they came up with that number, given that they never did this before. The execution process began at 7:53 Central Time, and Smith was pronounced dead at 8:25. According to Alabama Department of Corrections officials. Nitrogen flowed for about 15 minutes during the procedure, State Corrections Commissioner John Hamm said in a news conference. Smith, who was on a gurney, appeared conscious for, quote, several minutes into the execution and shook and writhed for about 2 minutes after that, media witnesses said in a joint report. That was followed by several minutes of deep breathing before his breath began slowing until it was no longer perceptible for media witnesses, the witnesses said. When asked at the news conference about Smith shaking at the beginning of the execution, Hamm said Smith appeared to be holding his breath for as long as he could and may have also struggled against his restraints. Quote, there was some involuntary movement and some agonal breathing. So that was all expected and is in the side effects that we've seen and researched on nitrogen hypoxia, Hamm said. So nothing was out of the ordinary of what we were expecting, unquote. Agonal breathing is an irregular gasping breath pattern that can happen when someone is near death. Smith's spiritual advisor, the Reverend Jeff Hood, who'd previously expressed concern that the method could be inhumane, witnessed the execution and described it in more graphic terms, saying it was, quote, the most horrible thing I've ever seen. Smith, wearing a tight-fitting mask that covered his entire face, convulsed when the gas was turned on, popped up on the gurney repeatedly, and gasped, heaved, and spat, Hood said. It was absolutely horrific, he said. Smith made a lengthy statement in front of the witnesses before the execution started, according to the pool reporters. Quote, "Tonight, Alabama caused humanity to take a step backward," Smith said in part, according to the reporters. "I'm leaving with love, peace, and light. Thank you for supporting me. Love all of you." Smith made a "I love you" sign in sign language with one of his hands that was facing the room where his family was witnessing, the Journalist Joint Report said. Elizabeth Sennett's sons, she's the woman who was murdered, told CNN earlier Thursday that they felt it was time for Smith's sentence to be carried out, adding they believed their mother had been overlooked due to the focus on the execution method. The family has forgiven everyone involved in the killing, including Smith, Michael Sennett said at a news conference Thursday night. Quote, "His debt was paid tonight," the son said. All right, so just to fill out some of the things I cut for brevity. The sons were in their 20s when the mother was murdered. She was the wife of a pastor who, classic true crime plot, hired them to kill her for the insurance money. He was having an affair. So the family has said, because of their Christian beliefs, they forgive him and everyone involved, but they still wanted to see the execution carried forward. So I wanted to include something from the victims, because a lot of times people will say if you're sympathetic to the cause of abolishing the death penalty that you're ignoring the victims. And I don't in any way ignore the victims or their pain or their desire for resolution or closure. I personally believe you cannot even get to talking about whether the state has the right to take a life until you create a perfect justice system that doesn't make mistakes. So in other words, I don't believe in the death penalty because that's not possible. As long as there is the possibility of an innocent person being executed, you can't even get to the conversation about the morality of the death penalty. And also keep in mind, they're using an experimental method here largely because countries in Europe have started to refuse to sell the chemicals that they need for the chemical injection that had become the preferred method over the last several decades. That's why at first they tried to do it with home-brewed versions, and you'd have these horrific incidents where one man, it took 45 minutes before he died. So now they're looking for other ways that will not be defined as cruel and unusual punishment. So that's why they're experimenting now with methods like this.
Killing someone in jail is an escalation that can't be undone.
Exactly.
I'm against the death penalty too for that reason, right? You lock someone up based on, faulty evidence or something they didn't do. There will never be true reconciliation for that person since everybody only gets one life. And so there's no way to give them the years back that they spent in a cage wrongfully, but at least you can let them go. At least you can try and do right by it. Once you execute them, there's no way of doing that. So yeah, I've always been against the death penalty for pretty much exactly that reason. But beyond that, this is just torture. It's just depraved. It's just sick. And this is an empire in decline. This is just the kind of depravity, the kind of barbarism that is characteristic of a collapsing social order, right? I mean, we don't have anything else to do. We don't have any other ideas about how to make our society better than to come up with new ways to execute inmates. This one by replacing the oxygen in their blood with nitrogen in their blood. That's an idea sprung. Hey, I got an idea. Not maybe we should try and, build housing for homeless people. Maybe we should not try to, expand healthcare for people or jobs programs. No, let's figure out a new way to execute inmates to prove to everyone else outside of the jail that you better stay in line, because if you cross our state, we will torture you to death. It's just depraved. It's sick, and it is characteristic of a society that has just given up on making things better. So now we're just going to enforce existing orders by making penalties for stepping outside of them. increasingly medieval, right? I mean, this is like, if they had the technology to do this in medieval times, they would.
Well, and you're not going to get it from this court. In fact, this court turned down the final appeal. This is irreconcilable with the constitutional prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. There is no way that this is that. I think the death penalty generally fits the definition of cruel and unusual punishment.
Yes.
But particularly when you're talking about experimental methods. You want to talk about painless. They should just be doing the electric chair if you're going to go back to this.
Of course.
Like but of course, the entire practice. I mean, overall, philosophically, I think we both agree it should be banned. I think it's barbaric to be executing people. Very often, these people in prison have a lot of revelations and gain a lot of insight, and try to be the best people they can be. Not all of them, but a lot of them have religious conversions in jail. I mean, it's kind of a cliche. So are you executing the person that committed that crime in 1988 by the time you're executing them now? Does this man deserve to be executed the way that man arguably did?
It's also, for me, I think, you lock someone in jail for life if they've committed murder in order to protect the general population from being killed by a dangerous person, and you use that penalty obviously as a deterrent, so that people are less inclined to go out and commit heinous crimes. It's not the role of the state to exact emotional revenge on behalf of the victim.
That's it.
It's not the role of the state to satisfy a victim by filling them with a sense of vengeance or retribution. There's a difference between justice and vengeance, right? That's the first scene of The Godfather, right? He says, you're not asking for justice, you're asking for revenge, or something like that. Those are different things. And so if capital punishment provides some sort of closure for the victims' families or loved ones, I'm sorry, it's not the role of the government to do that. They should be given help, piecing their lives back together. It's a horrible trauma, obviously, but it's not the role of the government to give you that emotional satisfaction. It's the role of the government to protect the people and to provide deterrence for committing heinous acts of violence. You could do that plenty well with life in jail. You don't have to resort to this kind of barbarism.
In some ways, you could argue it's worse.
In some ways, you could.
Entire life in jail.
It's worse. In some ways, you could argue it's worse. But what it is it's, and as you said, it's reversible to an extent.
It's reversible if you made a mistake.
Exactly.
And as cliche as it is, it's not going to bring their mother back.
Right. Exactly.
Please clap.